Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's a new day, and that means we're going to continue the training. So far, this puzzle streak has extended through 2 episodes. The first one was very brief. Maybe it was 3 or 4 or 5 puzzles. The second part, I've gotten up to 25 puzzles in a row. And today I have a little bit more time. I'm going to hopefully get all the way up to 50 correct puzzles in a row. And after that, I'll probably play a training game as well. So that's the plan. And without any further ado, let's make the most of this time to try and solve these puzzles. Okay, so the first puzzle here, this looks like it's going to be a discovered attack against his queen if we can give a check here or here. So one thing, the obvious question is, where do you want to give the check? Do you want to give it here or here? I think the answer is not this, because that would allow him to capture with his queen. Whereas if we come here with check, he either has to move his king, take with his bishop, or take with his pawn. And in either case, that will all leave his queen undefended. So check, and we take the queen. All right, off to a good start. We can see here there's some connected pass pawns. So those are pretty dangerous, extremely dangerous, really. At the same time, he's got a pawn which is under attack by 2 of my pieces, and therefore I could take it. And he would more or less be forced to recapture my rook. I don't think he could really afford to let me take this and, not do anything else about it. So I think if I took, he would have to take back. I could take with my king, and there's a pretty good likelihood he would move the rook. Although now that I'm seeing it, he also has this other pawn. So this other pawn could just become a queen. It's currently defended by the bishop. So, okay, there's a lot going on in this situation. There is a lot going on in this situation that we should be careful of. If we take the rook, he gets a queen, which I don't really want to allow, of course. Perhaps we should try and get our own queen. If he does get this queen, we do have that covered. And then if he were to recapture, we can take there too. So that actually is all under control. If he were to take the rook, we can take with the king, which blocks this pawn. And at the same time, again, if that pawn ever moves and promotes, then our bishop can capture. So in a way, I think that does give us free rein to just push this pawn. And there's not going to be any way for him to stop it with this bishop, because it'll just become a queen. Again, all of these moves are under control as far as I can tell. We wouldn't take that way. We would have to take that with the king. So I think if he wants to stop this from becoming a queen, he would actually have to move his rook back. And assuming he does move his rook all the way back, then is there any way we can actually promote the queen? I suppose one thing we could try then is putting this bishop over here to defend the promotion square. Again, our rook is always going to be present to take care of this pawn. Our king always takes care of this pawn. And I don't see any way for him to stop that queening square from occurring. If our pawn is here, he won't be able to bring the rook over here to further defend this pawn, because we cover that square too. So I think that's going to be the answer. I can't see any other options for him. If we do this and he comes after this bishop, that's okay. We get our queen, he takes the bishop, and then we would continue on with taking his bishop. And again, if he gets a queen, our rook is there. Our king always saves this. So that's the move I'm going to go with. Let's just beat him to the chase. He gets a queen. All right, that's the purpose of this bishop. So we'll take that. And that's it. Okay, so we move on to the next puzzle. So far, so good. This time we're playing as black. And immediately I can see the black king is looking very surrounded. There's not a lot of squares for it to move to at present. Only 2 squares for it to move to. So it's looking quite dangerous for black. For white, the black king seems quite safe. It can't be checked by by anything at the moment. So it looks like this is just crushing for black. I definitely should have a look at this move first. It's a checking move. If he just moves the king away, we win a rook. So I think based on that, he would have to capture. And after he captures, we can recapture with the pawn. And he can't take, and we will be threatening to get a queen. So he would have to probably move his king to one of these two squares. Now, if he moves his king to this square, we would have check, which moves him out of that square and also protects the queening square for the pawn, which means he's probably going to move to this square. And again, then we can put the bishop here to protect the queening square. And I see no way at all for him to defend against the queening of this pawn on this square. Any other idea might be chasing away the rook, because of course getting a queen is good, but I'm wondering whether there might be a checkmate here. If we chase this rook away, where can it go? I mean, if it goes anywhere at all, let's say just here, okay, then we can come up with a check, which would force him to come here or here. If he comes here, then I suppose we can continue on getting a queen. But it is becoming a fair bit more complicated. And I prefer to go for the simple route. Okay, he moves the king out of the way, just gives us the rook. So I think we're going to get the rook and then get the queen afterwards, rather than getting the queen, letting him take here, and then getting a queen, pinning the rook, although that would also be extremely good. I think this is a situation where it doesn't really matter. Now, I wonder if I'm wrong about that. So I'm going to take the rook. I'd be very interested to go back to that one, number 27, and just have a look whether or not it mattered. But for the moment, well, you know what? We're here. We're in the moment. Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this. So after the check and he moves to the side, what would happen if we, I know that this was the answer. I get that. But what would have happened if instead, if we play this against a computer, what if we had tried to go for a promotion? And what have I missed here? It says now that white is winning really well. I guess he can just guard the promotion square. And that makes a lot of sense. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me at the time, but I suppose it does. I suppose it does. Okay, and if we try to dislodge that rook, he's going to have time to reorganize his pieces. Here comes the knight. And again, if we try and dislodge the rook, he can take our rook. Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. And if we just try and trade pieces, we're going to end up giving him a passed pawn. And okay, so that makes sense. So if we go back, we can now see that taking the rook was very good because, hey, we're up a rook. We're going to get our queen. What's the big deal? Whereas doing this actually lets him really consolidate. All right, so let's move on. Next puzzle. We're playing this one as white. We've got a rook up in his grill. We've got a passed pawn, which is threatening basically to become a queen very shortly. Now, how basically I think this is going to be a puzzle of how to get the queen. If we take this pawn, then we have connected or a protected passed pawn. This one wouldn't quite be passed because the pawn here could always take. But what if we try and be a bit quicker? What if we give a check here? King can't come here. If we give the check here, the king cannot come here, can't come here, can't come there. So that's actually going to be a pretty dead in the water king. The knight's too far away to jump back to defense, which really only leaves the rook to defend. But after we capture that rook, that will actually be checkmate. So there's no point trying to protect the passed pawn with a long-term plan of queening when you can get mate in too. So we continue on. And this one is, again, quite a complex situation in certain ways. We've got our king, which is relatively open. The kingside pawn structure has been decimated, both for the white king and the black king. But the black king is surrounded by rooks doubled on the G file and a light squared bishop. I am noticing as well that the queen and the king are both on a light squared diagonal. We have a light squared bishop, so there may be some ideas with that. And I'm also noticing that in general, the black queen is a long way away from the black king. Okay, so there's a few observations. We also do have rooks doubled on a file, but they are doubled on a file which has a pawn protected by another pawn. So if we were going to take, it would be something of a sacrifice. We could take back then, and I guess the beauty of taking back there would be that we're threatening the queen and king rook, the queen and king fork. And another thing I'm seeing is if we take here, which immediately threatens this double attack or the fork, if he were to take back, we also have this check. And there's no way he can intercept the check. He would have to move the king. And after he moves the king, then we can recapture with the other rook, which threatens checkmate as well as the double attack on the king and the queen. So I actually do think it's going to be this move. After he takes back, we can give a check. After he moves here, we recapture with the other rook. Is there any way for him to prevent checkmate, which is the most important threat? Well, there is a way for him to defend this square as well as his queen at the same time by bringing his queen up here. So therefore, we would not be able to deliver checkmate on that square. And we can't deliver checkmate on this square either because of this rook. However, even in that circumstance, we take, he takes, we give check, he comes here, we recapture, he comes here. In that circumstance, because his queen is no longer on the diagonal, our bishop is still free to come and give this check, which is mate, except for the fact that he can block with the bishop, with the rook, and then we can give it again. And I believe that is checkmate. So we take, we give a check, and that was it. Okay, so we're up to 30, so we're doing pretty well. If you're still with me here, it's you notice that it starts to get quite difficult to maintain your concentration over an extended period of time, and really we've only been going for 15 minutes or thereabouts. So that's part of the challenge of chess, is maintaining your awareness and your high level concentration for extended periods of time. But that's exactly what we want to do here. Now, in this position, we're black, and I can see that there's an open file here on the A file. And as black, we could double rooks on this file, and immediately we would be having an attack on that bishop. And that bishop is very vulnerable. It really can't be defended because the knight here won't be able to jump back to its defense due to the pawn being able to capture it. And after the recapture, that bishop is a goner. The only other way that the bishop could be defended would be to move the bishop away from the attacking pieces. But if you move the bishop away really anywhere, even if you make a capture, well, then we're going to have checkmate on A1. So I think this is jumping out at me as the move. Is there anything else he could try? Something like this to attack the rook. I don't think it works. We take the bishop, and then what's his idea? Because we're also threatening mate. So maybe he just defends against the mate threat. But in that case, at least we've won a bishop. We've won a bishop in the least. And that's basically going to be a good thing. We could try moves like this, but he just takes. So that's not going to be good. Here, here, and here. And then in order to prevent mate, he could also come here. We could give a check then. and that would be a very effective check to give. So I think just winning the bishop is probably going to be it. Is there anything else to really consider? Probably not. So win the bishop. Very good. We move on. Puzzle number 31. Playing as white, and in this scenario, it seems as though our bishop is under attack. It seems as though his queen and bishop have been attacking our king, and our king's had to run away. Now we're somewhat in the center of the board. Okay, fair enough. Now I can also see here our bishop is doing a good job of attacking towards the king. Potentially there are even sacrificial ideas here with check, and if the king captures, there's another check here. Now the rook wouldn't be able to recapture because we can take, supported by the bishop. And if we check and the king runs back, then there's take the rook with checkmate. So I actually think that's going to be it. He's prompting us to move the bishop. We can move the bishop. If he doesn't take, well, he actually has to take because he's under an obligation to take. So yeah, that's going to be it. We take, we check, and then the rook is here for the taking. Is there any better way to finish this off? I would say not. After we take here, then we can continue the attack. Okay, so we're 32 puzzles in. Things are going pretty well. How do we continue on? So this looks like it's fairly early in the middle game. There's still a lot of pieces on the board. Our king is castled with Fianchetto, the dark squared bishop. His king's also castled, and a lot of his pieces are out in the middle of the board attacking us. And he's come in with a move here to capture a pawn, which he's supported by the bishop. Now the question is, how do we proceed? Well, the most obvious move that comes to mind is what happens if we take the rook. He takes back with the bishop, and then immediately comes to mind is this queen move, queen a5, which is therefore going to be an attack on the bishop and also an attack on the rook. And I don't see any way for him to defend both of those things at the same time. So we take, he takes, we come here. He probably wants to save his rook. It's more important than the bishop. So, if he comes in with a move like this, then we even have, check if we want it. It's not mate because he can drop the bishop back. But then in that case, we can take this and we will be threatening all sorts of very, very strong moves. So I think this is going to be the move, take, and double attack, and then accept whatever consequences come from there. It all looks very good. All of his sort of threats seem to be parried by our other pieces. So I don't think we need to worry about any of that. However, the only potential issue would be, could he sacrifice the rook for a pawn after taking the bishop? And then after we take back, can he take here? And then when we take, give checkmate? No, everything is covered. So I'm going to take. And we're going to go for that double attack. All right, so what have we got here? Again, it sort of seems like we might have had some sort of a discovery. Can we do something like this, which attacks the queen? It also directly defends our bishop. And even if he takes our queen, do we necessarily have to take back? Of course, we can take back. If he takes our knight, then we would take his bishop. So that's why we can get away with doing this. If he takes our queen, there is a check, but he can take with the rook. So I think if we played this move, he would take our queen and we could recapture the queen. And, that's a move. There's also this bishop here, which is not on pre, excuse me, it is defended by the rook. Is there the possibility of a check like this when he recaptures, following up with a check? Probably not, because he can take. Is there, let's see, what else is going on in this position? What else is going on in this position? Somewhat of a difficult one. Now, The knight is defended. We don't need to jump the knight away in order to defend the bishop. You know, another move that now comes to mind is, what if we just retreat the bishop with an attack on the queen? If this queen tries to take the knight, we just recapture with the pawn, and then the queen defends the pawn from the attack of the bishop, so everything there is nice. But the beauty of attacking the queen like this is that we're also x-raying the h2 pawn, and thereby threatening mate. So I believe after this, he's going to have to give up the queen for the bishop, because if he moves the queen somewhere off this diagonal, which is what he would have to do in order to spare himself death of queen by bishop, you know, let's say he moves back to here, for example, well, then the mate comes. So I think that's going to be the move. Okay, now I didn't consider a counterattack on our queen. Counterattack on our queen. Now that's a really nice move I did not consider. I suppose we still, regardless, just take the queen. And when he takes our queen, we get to take a bishop. And we are up material. We're still threatening this. We're threatening this. Everything looks really good there. There's no point giving a kamikaze check because he takes with the queen. And when we take back, he takes our bishop. And it actually turns out to be good for him. So we take the queen. And I'm only wondering, do we take this first? But that gives him an opportunity to counterattack our bishop again. So I'm going to take his bishop first. And we'll go on from there. So, okay, 34 puzzles in. Things are going pretty nicely. How do we proceed from here? Now, this move comes to mind because if he takes, then we can use our rook to deliver a checkmate, supported by the pawn. And he really has to take because he's checked. There's no way he can intercept the check. And he can't move the king anywhere. So that actually is just definitely going to be correct. 35th puzzle here. Straight away, this move comes to mind. It's a check. I am aware that he's threatening checkmate, so we do have to be careful. But can we get a checkmate of our own here? Here he basically has a number of options. He can retreat his rook. That would be one option. If he does that, we can then force a queen trade with check and the attack on his queen. If he takes, then we go into an end game, which, yeah, I'm not sure about that one, whether that's winning. So is there another way around this scenario? Not completely sure. We also, now that I see it, we also have this check, which also attacks the rook. It is possible for him to defend in a similar way by just bringing the rook back. But in that scenario, we then have our rook to give a check up on c7, sorry, on e7. And now the king is going to have to move away. And wherever it moves, we're then going to be able to capture his rook and defend our rook at the same time, increasing the pressure against his king and ultimately just winning a rook. So I think that's going to be the move. Okay, and in the end, he doesn't defend this way, which means we get to just take the rook at our leisure. Is there any other move to consider? I would say not. So we take, he moves, we take the rook, and we go into a winning endgame. Now this automatically, I mean, we've only got a couple of moves to consider. We have to move either here or here. And that's really very, very interesting. Really very interesting, because if we move here, it would appear that we drop our rook. So the instinctive move might be to come here so that we're protecting our rook and attacking the queen. The issue with that is twofold. One issue is that he can then give us a check here. And then when we move the king, anywhere else, he can then take our rook. Whereas if we do this, he actually can't take the rook, because if he does take the rook, then we take his rook, and that will be a back rank checkmate. So if we come here, even if he didn't take the pawn, what he could do is take the rook with check, forcing us to capture, and then take this rook. And that would probably be winning for him too. So it's very important that out of these two squares, we choose this one. and now he can give a check, but after we capture, he cannot recapture our rook because we would back rank him with the other rook. So we get the queen here. Straight away, this move comes to mind in this example. He would recapture. We can take here. He can recapture in a certain number of ways. This move also comes to mind, check. If he moves here, then of course there's going to be checkmate. Likewise, if he moves here, then there's going to be checkmate. So this move absolutely forces him to recapture with the king. And after recapturing with the king, we can use this rook to give another check. And again, this king's not going to have really any good squares to go to from there. If it then comes here, we could come here where we threaten both a rook and checkmate. And I think that's going to be the answer, but let's try and be accurate in working out the follow-up. So after check, if he were to come here, that would be mate straight away. And that's the reason that after check, he takes check, he takes check. And he moves back up here. Then I think the answer lies in this, attacking the rook. And there's what would be his best move? I don't think there's any way for him to actually defend. I mean, it's everything there looks good, because if he tries to defend the rook, he loses based on checkmate. Any other defensive possibilities before we get to that stage? So maybe after check, instead of moving his king back, maybe he can block with a bishop, but that's not good. We recapture and we're going to win the queen. So that's going to be the move. Okay, so he's going to give us the rook, is how he's opting to do this. I wonder if instead of taking the rook, can we take this bishop? If we take the bishop, he can recapture, and then we take the rook. That might be a move. What I was thinking is if we do this, he can take the queen, then we can take this, and that could be checkmate. But of course, he's got that square covered several times. Moreover, if we take this rook, they're also directly attacking this rook as well as checkmate. So I'm going to take the rook. Okay, so 38 puzzles into the training session, and things are going fairly well today. There's clearly a move of taking the queen here. If he wants to take back, he has to take with the knight. And that actually gives me another idea. If only this knight didn't exist, we could take the queen straight away. The problem is if we spend time taking the queen, taking the knight, he can take our queen. But then I see that if he takes our queen, we can then give a check. He won't be able to recapture with his rook because his rook will be blocked by our pawn. So after the check, he has to move the king. And after he moves the king, we recapture the queen. And in that circumstance, we've won a knight and a queen for the price of a queen and possibly a pawn. So I'm going to do that. However, if I take the knight, can he take my knight with check? And the answer to that is no, because my queen pins his queen to his king. So we're going to take the knight. And it's actually incorrect. Incorrect. So got a bit smug there, didn't pay enough attention. So the correct move was actually just to take the rook. There was a rook hanging there for free. I didn't see that whatsoever. And, that is obviously disappointing. But this is part of the challenge of chess, like I was saying, is trying to maintain your concentration over a long period of time. Because ultimately in a chess game, the average game might go for 30, 35 moves, 40 moves, and sometimes they go for 50, 60, 70, 100, 110 moves. The games can be very, very long. And in such circumstances, there's an old adage in chess, I forget who said it and what the exact quote is, but you can make, I'm paraphrasing, 55 excellent moves in a row, and it means nothing if you get the 56th move wrong. You know, this puzzle streak was going well, and I got 37 of them correct in a row, but it means nothing because I got the 38th one wrong. So I'm back to square one. Now, of course, in reality, doing these 37 puzzles, including the one that I got wrong, will hopefully teach me something about chess and help me to improve. So it's not for nothing, but it just goes to show that concept that you can never rest on your laurels. You can never think that because you've come a certain distance that you're definitely going to end up achieving what you've set out to achieve in the beginning. And that's, I guess, one of the lessons of chess. One of the lessons of chess, this sustained effort is very important, not becoming complacent and just never assuming that you're going to be victorious based on the fact that you've been victorious in the past. So just because you've done good moves, it means nothing. Every move matters. Every move matters. And it's like in life, every day you wake up, that's another day that matters. Just because you've had 3 months of, being on a roll in life and things are going really well for you, you can't wake up and think to yourself, I'm just going to do nothing today. I'm just going to muck around and, rest on my laurels, because that's when things start to come undone. So again, let's look at the actual chess piece, backing away again now from the philosophy. But if we were to have taken the rook, clearly that's a nice move. We win a rook, we defend our knight, we're still attacking his knight, and after that knight moves, we can then fork the king and the bishop, get some trades, and probably win an easy endgame. The issue with taking the knight, that's what I would like to know, because if we take the knight, he can't take our knight, he could take our queen, but we get to take back. So I guess I don't really see whether that was actually like a really bad idea, or if it just wasn't as good as taking the rook. Taking the rook is better, but is it so bad to take the knight? If he takes back, we take the queen, and that's fantastic for us. What's really the issue here? If we take the knight, is he going to play something like this and double attack our knight? But in that case, I would take his queen. He can take queen. We can defend knight. That might get tricky, because then if he attacks our knight, well, we can come here to defend this square. We can put a rook to defend this square. So I'm going to enlist now the help of the computer to try and tell me why what I did was so wrong. Let's see. So if we take the rook, we have a +3 advantage. Whereas if we take the knight, the advantage swings to black significantly. Now, after he takes the queen, yes, we do have the fork. The king comes down, we take the queen, and it seems to suggest taking the pawn this way. And in this scenario, we've got a knight and a bishop and a rook versus just a rook and a bishop. Now, we've got 3 pawns versus 5 pawns. So the truth of the matter is we are up in material. And in my mind, this was enough reason, to suggest that we should be able to win this. But the computer is adamant that black has a large advantage here. So what I might do is I might create another video analyzing this position. It's the tactic that stumped me. It's therefore probably the thing that I need to focus on. The other tactics are good practice, they're good warm-up, but this was clearly something I didn't understand, which is the reason I got it wrong. And therefore, I think if I spend a little bit extra time, really invest a bit of extra time trying to understand the intricacies of what went wrong and why, perhaps that will help me to improve quicker and to a larger extent. So I'm going to leave this video here, and I'm going to make another video analyzing what went wrong. And that will be the final video, the final part in episode 1 of Puzzle Streaks. After that, I'll do an episode 2 where I again attempt a new puzzle streak. So we'll see you in the next and final part of this episode. See you then.